In 1982, one company in West Hartford, Connecticut, had the entire home video game industry in the palm of its hand. Its console was outselling everything else on the market. Its stock had jumped from $7 to $36 in a single year. Its factories were running around the clock. 6 years later, those factories were empty. The company was bankrupt, and the name that had defined an entire generation's relationship with arcade gaming was being auctioned off piece by piece. This is the Coleco story, and it is not just a story about a video game company. It is a story about what happens when you mistake one good decision for a guarantee of everything that comes after it. A leather company that became a toy empire. Coleco did not start in a garage with two engineers and a dream about video games. It started in 1932 with a Russian immigrant named Maurice Greenberg selling shoe repair supplies out of a store in West Hartford, Connecticut. The Connecticut Leather Company, Coleco, supplied leather, rubber footwear, and the tools of the shoe repair trade to working Americans during the Great Depression. Maurice's son Leonard had a gift for engineering that the original business could barely contain. In the 1940s, he built a small factory in the back of his father's shop and began experimenting with manufacturing processes that had nothing to do with shoe repair. In the 1950s, using new vacuum plastic molding technology he had largely taught himself, Leonard began making wading pools. Cheap, durable, affordable backyard pools for ordinary American families who wanted something more than a garden hose on a hot afternoon. It worked extraordinarily well. By 1963, Coleco had acquired the Kestrel Corporation, a maker of inflatable vinyl pools and toys, and became the largest manufacturer of above-ground swimming pools in the world. The company that had started selling shoe polish was now filling backyards across America. By 1961, the leather business had been sold off entirely. The Connecticut Leather Company became Coleco Industries, Inc., keeping the abbreviation while shedding the original product entirely. By the end of the 1960s, Coleco operated 10 manufacturing facilities and had moved into a new corporate headquarters in Hartford. The toy empire was real. The first brush with video games, and near death. In the mid-1970s, the home video game market exploded almost overnight. Atari's Pong had proven that people would pay real money to play electronic games at home. Every company with a manufacturing background and ambition started looking at the market. Coleco entered with the Telstar series of dedicated Pong consoles in 1976. The timing could not have been better, or worse, depending on how you look at it. Coleco was one of the first companies to secure a supply of General Instrument's Pong on a chip, the silicon component that made these consoles possible, and received a complete shipment while competitors waited. The Telstar sold nearly 1 million units in its first run. Then the market collapsed. By 1977, dozens of competing Pong-style consoles had flooded shelves from manufacturers all over the world. The oversaturation was so severe and so sudden that the entire dedicated console market effectively died inside a single holiday season. Coleco was left holding enormous inventory and staring at what should have been bankruptcy. They pivoted hard and fast into handheld electronic games. Solid-state devices with LED displays that simulated sports. Electronic Quarterback was one of their first entries, and it sold well. A full line of two-player head-to-head sports handhelds followed. Football, basketball, baseball, soccer, hockey. Then came something even more ambitious. The Mini Arcade series. Licensed miniature tabletop versions of actual arcade games, Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, Galaxian, Frogger, that a kid could put on their bedroom desk and feel like they had their own private arcade cabinet. The first 4 mini arcades sold approximately 3 million units within a year of launch. Pac-Man alone moved 1.5 million units. Coleco had survived near death and come back stronger. The lesson it should have learned was discipline. Know your limits, manage your ambition, do not overextend. The lesson it appeared to learn instead was that boldness always pays off. That distinction would prove fatal. The ColecoVision, the moment everything worked. In August 1982, Coleco launched the ColecoVision home video game console. It was, by almost any measure, the most important product launch in the company's history, and one of the most important moments in early home gaming. The ColecoVision was built around a simple but powerful idea. Bring the arcade experience home with genuine fidelity, not a rough approximation. Not a version with half the levels missing and graphics that bore only passing resemblance to the real thing. The actual arcade experience, as close as home hardware could deliver in 1982. To prove it, Coleco made one of the shrewdest business moves in early gaming history. They secured the exclusive home console rights to Nintendo's Donkey Kong, the hottest arcade game in the world, and bundled it with every single ColecoVision sold. You did not pay extra for Donkey Kong. It came in the box. Every ColecoVision customer walked home with the definitive home version of the game every other kid in the country was pumping quarters into at the arcade. The result was immediate and overwhelming. By Christmas 1982, Coleco had sold over 500,000 ColecoVision units. The console was outselling both the Atari 2600 and Mattel's Intellivision simultaneously. Coleco's total sales that year nearly tripled, jumping from $178 million in 1981 to $500 million in 1982. The company's stock price went from roughly $7 a share to nearly $37. By spring 1983, ColecoVision sales had passed 1 million units in North America alone. Even Nintendo took notice. Masayuki Uemura, the engineer who led development of the Famicom, which would eventually become the Nintendo Entertainment System, acknowledged that the ColecoVision set the bar that influenced how he approached creating the Famicom. The people building what would become the most successful gaming platform in history were using Coleco's console as their benchmark. Coleco had done it. A leather company turned pool manufacturer turned handheld game maker had just become the dominant force in home video gaming. The factories in Connecticut and New York were producing product as fast as they could run. And right there, at the absolute top, with everything working, the sales numbers climbing, the press celebrating, the stock price at its peak, Coleco made the decision that undid all of it. The Atom, one of the greatest product disasters in American history. In the summer of 1983, at the Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago, Coleco unveiled the Atom family computer system. The concept was genuinely compelling. A home computer that used the ColecoVision as its hardware base, adding word processing capability, a letter quality printer, and a digital tape drive, all for a package price of $600 at a time when comparable home computer setups cost significantly more. Existing ColecoVision owners could upgrade. New buyers got a complete family computing and gaming platform in one box. The audience at CES was impressed. Industry analysts were cautiously optimistic. Coleco announced it expected to ship 500,000 Atom units by Christmas 1983. The company launched an enormous marketing campaign, television commercials, print ads in Time and People, the full weight of a company flush with success behind a single new product. What happened next became one of the most studied disasters in consumer electronics history. The first batch of Atom units shipped with so many hardware defects that UP to 60% of the machines were returned by buyers. The electromagnetic pulse generated by the Atom's power supply was strong enough to erase the digital tape data packs that the system used for storage, meaning that new software purchased for the machine could be destroyed simply by turning the computer on. The printer, positioned as a premium feature, was bulky, slow, and unreliable. The quality control failures were not subtle edge cases. They were systematic, fundamental, and immediately visible to any buyer who took the machine home. By Christmas 1983, Coleco had shipped only 95,000 Atom units against its projection of 500,000. The company was eventually hit with a class action lawsuit related to the Atom's defects, ultimately paying a settlement valued at millions of dollars. The losses from the Atom disaster were staggering. The company suffered $258 million in losses that were directly attributed to the computer's failure. Meanwhile, the video game crash of 1983, triggered largely by Atari's catastrophic mismanagement and the flooding of the market with terrible software, was destroying consumer confidence in the home gaming category entirely. The ColecoVision, which had been brilliant in 1982, now sat in showrooms next to a defective computer that had poisoned the Coleco brand. Quarterly sales of the ColecoVision dropped dramatically by early 1984. By January 1985, Coleco discontinued the Atom. Months later, the ColecoVision followed. The console that had beaten Atari and impressed Nintendo lasted barely 3 years in production. The Cabbage Patch rescue, and the second collapse. With video games gone, Coleco needed survival. It found it in the most unlikely place. In the early 1980s, an artist named Xavier Roberts had been selling handmade cloth dolls through craft fairs, marketing them not as toys to be bought, but as adoptions. Each doll came with a birth certificate and an adoption paper, making the child a parent rather than an owner. The concept was psychologically brilliant. Coleco licensed the rights, named the mass-produced version Cabbage Patch Kids, and launched them commercially in 1983. What followed was one of the most extraordinary toy phenomena in American retail history. Parents fought in stores. Fistfights broke out over the last dolls on shelves. Stores rationed them. Television news crews filmed the chaos. Coleco had stumbled into a cultural moment that no amount of marketing could have manufactured, and the factory production lines shifted from video game consoles to soft-bodied dolls with adoption certificates. In 1985, Coleco was riding the Cabbage Patch wave to revenues that masked the deeper structural damage from the Atom disaster and the video game crash. The company looked healthy on the surface, but the people running it made the same mistake they had made with the ColecoVision. They assumed the peak was permanent. It never is. By 1986, the Cabbage Patch fad had begun cooling. Coleco lost $111 million that year. In 1987, they lost another $105 million. Under pressure from creditors owed $335 million, and unable to secure new financing, Coleco filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection on July 14, 1988. An analyst quoted in the Christian Science Monitor at the time said it plainly: they were blinded by their success. The toy industry had seen this pattern before. A company hits a fad product, scales massively to meet demand, refuses to believe the fad will end, gets caught with enormous overhead when it does. Coleco, with a front row seat to its own near destruction in the Telstar oversaturation disaster just a decade earlier, repeated the pattern almost exactly. The factory floors go silent. The bankruptcy restructuring moved quickly and without mercy. All of Coleco's North American manufacturing assets were sold off. The plants in Amsterdam, New York, and other locations were closed. The workers who had built the ColecoVision, the mini arcades, the Atom, and the Cabbage Patch dolls on American factory floors lost their jobs as production was outsourced to foreign countries. The company that had once operated 10 manufacturing facilities across the northeastern United States and Canada was dismantled factory by factory. In 1988, Coleco's swimming pool and snow goods divisions were purchased by Canada-based SLM Action Sports. In 1989, Hasbro acquired the bulk of Coleco's remaining product lines, including the Cabbage Patch Kids, for $85 million. The board games Coleco had acquired through its expensive purchase of Selchow and Ryder, including Scrabble and Parcheesi, went with them. The intellectual property that had defined 2 decades of American childhood entertainment was divided up and distributed to new owners who had no connection to the Hartford headquarters where it had all been created. The workers scattered. The factories were repurposed or demolished. the corporate headquarters in West Hartford fell silent. By 1989, Coleco Industries, the company that had started with shoe repair supplies in 1932, built swimming pool empires, nearly died twice in video games, saved itself with a cloth doll, and then died anyway. No longer existed as an operating business. What those factory floors actually produced? It is tempting to look at Coleco's collapse as a straightforward story of corporate overreach. A company that kept betting everything on fad products and eventually ran out of chances. That analysis is accurate, but it does not capture what was actually happening inside those Connecticut and New York factories during the years when everything worked. The workers building ColecoVision consoles in 1982 and 1983 were not assembling a generic consumer product. They were making the machines that gave an entire generation of American children their first real experience of what a video game could be. The ColecoVision was not simply better than what came before it. It was categorically different. A device that closed the gap between the arcade and the living room in a way that previous home consoles had not managed. The kids who unwrapped one that Christmas were experiencing something genuinely new. The mini arcade workers were making tabletop cabinet replicas of games that lived in the imagination of every child who had ever stood in front of a real arcade machine, wishing they could take it home. The Donkey Kong tabletop, the Pac-Man tabletop. These were objects of genuine desire, built on licensed relationships that Coleco had negotiated at real cost, assembled in American factories by workers who were part of a manufacturing tradition rooted in that same Connecticut community where Morris Greenberg had first opened a shoe supply store 50 years earlier. When the factories closed and the production moved overseas, that continuity ended. The institutional knowledge of how to build these specific products in that specific way for that specific market belonged to a workforce that dispersed and never reassembled. The tooling was sold. The molds were transferred to new owners. The people who had run the production lines went home for the last time without ceremony. The name that would not stay dead. The Coleco brand did not disappear completely. It has a complicated afterlife that reflects how much the name still meant to people who had grown up with what it represented. In 2005, a Chicago-based brand revitalization company called River West Brands acquired the Coleco trademark and attempted to relaunch it. A handheld gaming device called the Coleco Sonic appeared in 2006, containing 20 games from the Sega Master System and Game Gear libraries. It was a product aimed squarely at nostalgia, people old enough to remember what Coleco had once meant. Who might respond to that name on a package? In 2014, Coleco Holdings was formed with plans for a cartridge-based console called the Coleco Chameleon. The announcement generated genuine excitement among retro gaming communities. The project collapsed in 2016 amid embarrassing revelations that prototypes shown to the public had been fraudulent. The name that had once represented genuine engineering achievement was attached to a failed crowdfunding venture. There was a particular cruelty in that ending for anyone who remembered what the original had been. What the game actually was. The ColecoVision's direct legacy runs deeper than most people recognize. The engineers who built the Famicom used it as their technical benchmark. The concept of bundling a killer app game with a console, establishing immediate value beyond the hardware itself, became an industry standard directly traceable to Coleco's Donkey Kong strategy. The expandability architecture that allowed the ColecoVision to play Atari 2,600 games through an adapter module foreshadowed the backward compatibility discussions that would define console generation transitions for the next 40 years. Coleco did not just make popular products. At its best, it made products that moved the entire industry forward, that forced competitors to raise their standards and gave consumers a real reason to believe that the home gaming experience could rival the arcade. That the company destroyed itself through a combination of a defective computer launch and a fad product dependency. It refused to manage carefully enough does not diminish what was built inside those Hartford factories during the years when everything worked. It makes the loss more painful to consider, because the capability was genuinely there. The engineering was real. The ambition was correct. The execution was catastrophic. Coleco lasted 56 years. The arcade dream it almost delivered lasted barely 3. Subscribe if stories like this one matter to you, because there are more of them. Companies that got close enough to touch something genuinely great, and then made the decisions that put it permanently out of reach.